Hello, everyone. Hi. How are you feeling today? You're good? Having a great time? What a happy bunch. Wow. Are you having fun at the dinners? I went to the dinner yesterday, and so many beautiful people there. I felt totally out of place. And I might be using more of Dove soap to feel more beautiful. So you might ask the question, what someone like me doing here next to Elif? First of all, let me introduce myself. My name is Bassem Youssef. I have, thank you. Oh, 2 people know me. Thank you. Oh my God, thank you. Where are you? Thank you. Thank you very much. I had a political satire show called Al Barnamij, which people describe me as the Jon Stewart of the Middle East, and I used that line to cover up for my insecurity that nobody knows me here. So I dropped famous names, and so you might ask, what is a guy like me doing sharing the stage with an incredible author and thinker and activist like Shafak? And I don't know. I think I come cheap, and second, I think Jon Stewart could only stay for 1 day, so they thought they would replace him with a cheap knockoff and you would not notice. But there are actually a lot in common between me and Elif. We come from maybe 2 different countries, but the same tactics of using religion, ultranationalism, and certain political narrative are used to crack down on dissent and opposing voices. And we will discover that as we go along. And Elif is an established author and writer. She's one of the best top-selling people in, authors in Turkey, published in more than 40 countries, wrote 14 books, and I got to tell you, her book, 40 Rules of Love, has been quoted on my Facebook feed from my female friends more than they have posted Instagram selfies. So it's quite an honor to be on the same stage with Elif, and I want to start from the beginning, your personal journey. You were raised by a single mom, and you grew up witnessing 2 worlds, the traditional world represented by your grandmother, and your modern world represented by your mom. And how does that inform you? How does that shape your mind and your writings?
Thank you, Bassem. It's wonderful to be here. So nice. I grew up, I was raised by 2 women, 2 completely different women. My mother, she was more modern, urban, secular, westernized. My grandmother, very different, more traditional, spiritual, Eastern, if I may say, definitely less educated, definitely more irrational. So I grew up observing these 2 worlds. It was a bit unusual at the time, so I'm talking about mid-1970s, Ankara, Turkey. It was a very conservative Muslim neighborhood. I was born in Strasbourg, but I came back to Ankara with my mom because she had got divorced by that point. And it's an important detail because when she got married, she quit, she left university. So by the time she came back with a baby in her arms, she had no diploma, no money, no job, and no other place to go to. And usually women in such positions in the Middle East, they're immediately married off to someone else, but usually to someone older because they're not very favorable in the marital market anymore, not being virgins, They immediately, they find new husbands for them, someone older, someone, but that process is very quick because a lonely woman is seen as a danger. And there was there were some people asking for my mother's hand. And I could see this entire neighborhood trying to find a suitable husband for her. It was my grandmother, my less educated grandmother, who intervened and said, no, you don't have to marry again. Go back to college, finish it, have your diploma, have your job, have choices in life. And then if you want to marry, of course remarry. But in the meantime, I'm going to take care of my grandchild. And that kind of solidarity, that kind of sisterhood between these 2 women left a big impact on me. So my mom went back to college, she graduated with flying colors, she became a diplomat, and afterwards life has always been very nomadic for me. But both worlds have an impact on me, my mother's and my grandmother's oral culture and spiritual world.
So it's not necessarily the stereotype of someone being traditional will throw you right in the hands of the first suitor just to get rid of you. Actually, it was totally different. So you are a very established and famous writer, and how do you connect through your writings? Like having these kind of experiences and these kind of backgrounds, how do you connect with your readers, with the issues that you talk about in your books?
I'm a storyteller, and this is how I connect with the universe, via stories. And we all have stories to tell. We all have stories to read and listen. I think stories save us. Books save us. They have saved me. I have experienced this firsthand. But if I may say particularly something about the genre of the novel, there's something very interesting there, because it is the loneliest form of art. The writer is alone when he or she is writing. The reader is alone when he or she is reading. And we rarely are alone, because in our daily life, constantly we are rushing from one place to another. The inner space is always forgotten. What I'm trying to say is, when we retreat into that inner space, when we're reading a novel, I think we become relatively more open to the universe, more open to empathy. To give you a better example, I have many homophobic readers in Turkey. But then they come to me on my book signings, and then they say, I love this character, and the character they're talking about is a transvestite or a homosexual or a bisexual. They connected with that character. I have many xenophobic readers who are very biased against Armenians, Jews, and many other minorities in Turkey. But then they say, in this novel, this was my favorite character, and that character is maybe an Armenian or Jewish. So I'm trying to say, fascism, I think, it's not a coincidence that fascism is a mass disease. We're always affected by the energy of other people. We're always less tolerant when we are in the company of other people, because the energy is contagious, it affects us. But when we are alone, when we open up our hearts and our minds, there's a better chance of developing our ability to empathize.
So you just mentioned that it saved you. How did it save you? I mean, I'm very curious.
I was a very lonely child, and as I said, because my mom was a working mother, and my grandma, she was like a healer of sorts. She had her own world. I always observed her. So I was on my own for long hours as I was growing up throughout my childhood and teenage years. In that neighborhood, there were all extended families, patriarchal families, where fathers were the heads of household. My situation was very different. I was like an insider-outsider. I was part of that society, and yet I wasn't. And that feeling never disappeared. I think books, when I discovered the land of Storyland, I realized I do not have to be bound by the limitations of a certain national identity, religious identity, ethnic identity. It was a transcendental experience for me. So really, books showed me that I can go beyond the limits that were drawn in front of me by my birth or, the identity that I found myself in.
So, like, books and storytelling might have saved you, but they also put you in a lot of trouble. And one of your books, The Bastard of Istanbul, you were accused of attacking Turkishness and you were even being called a traitor. Welcome to my land.
Yes,
Hi.
yes.
And
of course.
we got a lot of love, right? And I mean, how did that unfold? I mean, you were persecuted. You had like low suitcase people suing you in court, and you had been protected by bodyguards, and all of that because of a novel. And I think it was talking about the Armenian genocide. And people are now remembering 100 years past, and you were right in the middle of that. I mean, how did that feel? How did that unfold with you?
I think memory is a responsibility, We have to remember so that we can hopefully have a better future than the past. And learn coexistence. But if I may say this, I think every writer, journalist, poet, cartoonist in Turkey and across the Middle East knows that because of words, we can get into trouble. So when we write an article, a poem, even when we retweet a tweet, we do it with this knowledge at the back of our minds. When my novel, The Bastard of Istanbul, came out, I was, as you said, prosecuted under Article 301, which protects Turkishness, but that's a very ambiguous term. I was accused of insulting Turkishness.
Oh, you have the same articles.
I can imagine, of course. It was a very surreal experience. And my lawyer had to defend Armenian fictional characters in the court. You know, the entire thing was very surreal. But I'm sure you're very familiar with this experience, of course.
I had to defend my jokes. I had to explain what does that joke mean, but
yeah, because the loss of humor, is.
As a matter of fact, I think it's loss of imagination.
Sure, both.
Because like humor and fiction, they all both come from the same source of imagination, and I think some of the people that we deal with don't have imagination at all, or let alone sense of humor. It's going to be good for them if they have a sense of humor every
Absolutely.
now and then.
Yes.
So, but to be accused as being a traitor or anti-Turkey is one thing, but to step into the forbidden zone of religion is a totally different topic. You also had some backlash, some people, like extreme people, having their own accusation against you, and you've been in hot water because of your opinion. I mean, can you elaborate on that?
I think the picture is very complicated. I mean, when I look at the Islamic world, for me, this is not a monolithic world, and it is not a stagnant world at all. It never was, and it isn't today either. There are lots of different voices, some of them clashing, some of them coexisting. So, for instance, when I write a novel, and I never write in order to teach people anything. I don't like that, you know, the writer as a teacher. It doesn't work for me. But I love to raise questions, and I leave the answers to the readers. Every reader derives their own answers, but what matters to me much more than that is to ask questions about stories, but also about the silences. I am interested in silences. And I think, obviously, we have political taboos, but we have lots of sexual taboos as well. It's very difficult to talk about sexuality. It's also difficult to talk about sexuality in the Islamic world, but we must raise these questions. But what I'm trying to say is, we also get lots of positive feedback in addition or next to that, you know, harsh backlash. And what is mesmerizing to me is that both these responses exist within the same cultures. So it is definitely not a, you know, monolithic world.
Yeah, because a lot of people, and I get asked this question a lot, and people say that the critics of Islam, they say like it's not a religion of peace, it's not about poverty, it's not about socioeconomic conditions. It is deeply rooted in the text, deeply rooted in the religion, and you are just like we just come from a place where it's full of violence, and there's no way to reform unless that you have to reject it. And you get faced a lot with this kind of narrative.
Yes.
And how do you respond to that?
I think we need to give several answers at the same time. I mean, you and I'm assuming it must be very similar. I grew up observing women like my grandmother who were traditional in their own way, but strong and supportive at the same time. It is possible. We should refrain from sweeping generalizations. This is not helping. We need to look at issues in a more nuanced way. And I am afraid that many of those nuances are being lost in this narrative today. So I am critical of, you know, those generalizations. However, I am also critical of people who say, well, Islam is very peaceful. It's just, you know, the Western media that distorts it. That is not fair either. So what do? We need to, first of all, understand the problems. Patriarchy is a universal problem. Domestic violence is a universal problem. We must understand the universality of this. At the same time, we must understand why is it that in some places in the world it is more concentrated, it's more dense. So we can be critical of several things at the same time. I think extremist ideologies breed each other. You know, anti-Western sentiments in the Middle East go hand in hand with Islamophobia elsewhere. Extremist ideologies need each other.
Yeah, and thank you. If I may, a lot of people they think that for the past 1500 years we've been like having like a straight trajectory on the same path. But like if you look at pictures in the 1950s and 60s and 40s in now Afghanistan and now and Egypt and places in the Arab world, it has not been like this. I mean, what we see right now is fairly new. I mean, it's been there in the history, of course.
Yeah.
But the Al-Qaeda and ISIS and all of that, and I think people fail to see that it is politics and money. There are certain countries and monarchies in the world who breed and who actually feed this through support and through money, and it's the same monarchies that are supported and allies with the United States because they're so addicted to oil. And And I always give the example of you have crazy people everywhere. I mean, of course, there's certain stuff that you can build on, but there's also crazy stuff in everybody's scripture. So if you give the same amount of money and support to the Westboro Baptist Church, let's see what these crazy people will do. So it's just like it's an unopposed mentality that is having this support and money. And I'm sorry to interject because it kind of feels, but again, I mean, I think it's obvious that none of us here are like apologists, and we're trying to make like a fair argument here. Oh,
yes, I think fairness is important. I mean, we always talk about the Judeo-Christian tradition, but I don't hear people talking about Judeo-Christian Islamic tradition. Why not? You know, why can't we see the... I mean, they have so much in common, you know, the core values of every religion, and yet at the same time, we should not be afraid of criticizing either. There are lots of things to criticize. I mean, you know, in Mecca, in Saudi Arabia, if 14 girls died because they were not allowed to escape from a burning school because their hairs were not covered, if human life is not praised more than, you know, someone's interpretation of religion, then there's a problem there.
Yeah.
We must also, at the same time, criticize that and change that.
And the thing is, we face this kind of question: why don't we hear more moderate voices from the Islamic world who speak against that? I like hear that every single day.
Yes.
So you, as a moderate voice, can we hear your voice?
You know, I don't know if I would call myself a moderate voice, to be honest. I don't like labels. Whenever I'm put inside a box, I want to make a hole and just escape from that, you know, through that hole. But if I may say, I'm not a religious person. At all. And this is a bit difficult to talk about in Turkey, because in Turkey people think if you write about Sufism, oh, then you must be very religious. You know, it's always an either-or mentality, dualistic way of looking at things. I'm not religious. I'm interested in spirituality. In my world, these are different things. Yeah? I think all organized religions, at the end of the day, are based on a distinction between us versus them.
Yeah.
And the hidden, or sometimes manifest, assumption that us is better than them. I don't like that framework. Whereas in mysticism... Whereas mysticism, for me, these are like underground tunnels. So I love reading about Islamic mysticism, Sufism. It inspires me, it motivates me. But when I'm reading, I realize, you know, I come out of that underground tunnel and I realize I'm reading Jewish mysticism. I go back to the tunnel, I come out and I realize, wow, now I'm reading Christian mysticism. When did I, you know, because there are no boundaries. You put the mystics of each religion side by side, they would be good friends, they would understand. So for me, these are not separate things. I'm interested in that core that unites us.
So certain voices saying that they want to rely on certain rulers or military presidents, and they think that they are the hope of reforming the religion.
Yeah.
I mean, and now as if we're faced between two choices: either it's military dictatorship or religious extremism. And many voices in the West say they actually take refuge in the military right-wing dictatorship as an escape.
Yeah, you're so right.
Yeah, and I'm sure that you've been asked that, and I would really like to hear your opinion about that, because I've been having like tough times speaking about these topics here.
I can imagine. Just a small example. In London, there was, recently there was an event. I gave a talk, and I was very critical of military takeovers in Turkey, across the Middle East. I mean, in Turkey we have experienced 3 of them, each one worse than the one before. Lots of human rights violations, no freedom of expression. And then this woman in the audience, I never forget her, she came to me afterwards. She said, look, I'm from Egypt. As a woman, you have to understand, I need the protection of strong leaders. And I said, I do understand your point, but that is not the solution. We do not have to choose between two, bad alternatives. There are no alternatives between, extremist fundamentalism and authoritarianism. I'm not happy with either of them. I want democracy, I want human rights, I want women's rights, and definitely freedom of expression. So we don't have to confine ourselves to this duality. I think that duality is limiting us. In that sense, of course, what's happening in Egypt worries me. What's happening in Turkey also worries me.
So speaking about Turkey, people had very high hopes about Recep Tayyip Erdogan when he first came into power. But opinions have changed and shifted quite a lot. Not of course between his supporters, but like from outside. And you've been right in the middle of all of that.
I mean, of course, perceptions have changed tremendously. At the beginning, we must remember that this is a government that has been in power for almost 12 years, a very long time, and we have seen a big transformation. In countries like Turkey, I think the biggest problem is we have this tradition of strong state. In a mature democracy, you would protect the individual from the excessive power of the state. In Turkey, it is the exact opposite. You protect the state from the words of individuals, from minorities, so it's topsy-turvy, everything is upside down. And that authoritarianism is very, very problematic. It's a cycle that keeps repeating itself. Turkey is a very interesting country. It's a very complicated country. And I think what happens inside Turkey has, long echoes across the Muslim world. I wish things would have moved in a different way, because a country where, maybe the majority of people are Muslims, but at the same time, a country that is democratic, pluralistic democracy would have been very different. We have not moved in that direction. I am worried that we're going backwards, and especially when it comes to women's issues. The things that we took for granted, now I'm seeing that we are sliding backwards. So we have male politicians from above telling women how many children they should have, 3,
or you're not equal
5.
to men.
Or that they don't believe in gender equality, they believe in gender justice, and because they say this is an Islamic interpretation. Or we have male politicians telling us women that we should not laugh out loudly in the public space.
Oh, God forbid.
All these things have become normal in Turkey. So there's lots of things to criticize. Domestic violence also increased. Gender homicides have tripled. So we can, if we don't have the awareness and the women's movement that goes beyond ideological boundaries, we can very easily lose the things that we take for granted.
Well, here, we're coming to the end of the conversation, but coming back to the moderate voices, I know that you hate this word and I hate this word, but like I say, different voices. Because when people come from our region, from our culture, and something happens, and they bring a crazy fundamentalist guy on Hannity, on Fox News, and this is all you hear. And they don't understand there are people in Turkey and people in Egypt, for example, who have drawn cartoons in solidarity with Charlie Hebdo.
Of course.
Maybe even more than anything else. And people have spoke up against it, but because people don't translate our Arabic language or the Turkish language, they're not aware. And I think, don't you think, I'm not trying to defend the culture, but there are at least show both sides of the story, show both voices.
Yes, I agree. I think it's very important to understand that plurality of voices across the Middle East. We have many, people working for women's rights, LGBT rights. These are very, very important networks that should be supported, reinforced. At the same time, we should see that these systems are not democratic enough. So I would like to criticize the systems, but understand a government and the people is not the same thing.
Yes.
The people are always ahead of their governments.
Yes. I wish we had more time. This is an incredible interview, and I'm just going to take a selfie with you down there and actually put it on my Facebook, so people will be very jealous, and that will be better than any Instagram duck face. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.